The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient cobblestones of Vatican City as King Charles III stepped from his official vehicle. The familiar weight of royal duty rested on his shoulders, but today felt different. Today marked a historic moment that would bridge centuries of tradition with hopes for the future. Cardinal Giuseppe Bertello, the Vatican's governor, waited at the entrance to the pontifical Beda College with a warm smile. The college, nestled within the Vatican walls, had served as a seminary for English-speaking men seeking priesthood since 1852. Its red brick facade and ivy-covered walls spoke of decades of quiet devotion and learning. "Your Majesty," Cardinal Bertello said, extending his hand in greeting. "We are honored by your presence today." Charles nodded graciously, his eyes already scanning the courtyard where a small gathering had assembled. Among them stood Father Rector Nicholas Hudson, whose enthusiasm for this day had been evident in every planning meeting. The priest had dreamed of this moment for months, knowing that the king's participation would elevate a simple garden ceremony into something truly meaningful. The autumn air carried a crispness that reminded Charles of his beloved Highgrove Gardens back in Gloucestershire. For decades, he had championed organic farming and environmental conservation, often facing skepticism from those who saw his passion as eccentric. Today, however, his commitment to sustainable practices would take center stage in one of the world's most sacred places. "The tree awaits, Your Majesty," Father Hudson said, gesturing toward a corner of the college courtyard where a young orange tree stood in preparation for planting. The sapling, barely 3 feet tall, represented far more than its modest size suggested. This was not just any orange tree. It had been carefully selected from a grove in southern Italy, its roots tracing back to varieties that had flourished in Mediterranean gardens for centuries. The choice was deliberate, symbolic of the enduring connection between faith, nature, and human stewardship. As Charles approached the designated planting site, he noticed the careful preparations that had been made. The soil had been enriched with organic compost, and the hole had been dug to precise specifications. A simple wooden stake stood ready to support the young tree as it established its roots in Vatican soil. Camera crews from various international news outlets positioned themselves discreetly around the courtyard. This was not a grand state ceremony, but rather an intimate gathering that somehow felt more significant because of its simplicity. The king had specifically requested that the focus remain on the symbolism of the act rather than royal protocol. Sister Maria Benedetta, who oversaw the college gardens, approached with a blessed silver watering can. The elderly nun had tended these grounds for nearly 30 years, her hands bearing the calluses of honest work in service to God and nature. Her presence added a layer of authenticity to the proceedings that no amount of royal pageantry could match. "Your Majesty," she said in accented English, "this tree will grow alongside our seminarians. Both will put down deep roots in this holy place." Charles smiled at her words, understanding the deeper meaning behind her simple observation. The young men studying within these walls would eventually carry their faith to parishes around the world, just as this tree would one day provide shade and perhaps fruit for future generations of students. The small gathering included several seminarians, their black cassocks contrasting sharply with the colorful autumn leaves that had begun to fall in the courtyard. These young men, ranging in age from their early 20s to their 40s, represented different nations and backgrounds, yet shared a common calling to serve God and their communities. Among the observers stood Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a botanist from the Royal Horticultural Society who had advised on the selection and care of the tree. Her presence ensured that this ceremonial planting would follow best practices, giving the orange tree the greatest chance of thriving in its new environment. The Vatican's head gardener, Giuseppe Romano, had worked with Dr. Mitchell to prepare the perfect conditions. Romano, whose family had tended papal gardens for 3 generations, understood that this tree would require special attention in the coming months. The Mediterranean climate of Rome differed significantly from the controlled environment of the greenhouse where the sapling had spent its early life. As the ceremony began, Cardinal Bertello offered a brief blessing in Latin, his voice carrying across the courtyard with practiced authority. The ancient words seemed to resonate with the stone walls, connecting this moment to countless other blessings that had sanctified important events within Vatican City. Charles listened respectfully, though his mind wandered to his own gardens at Highgrove. There he had spent countless hours planting, pruning, and nurturing plants back to health. Gardening had become his meditation, his way of connecting with a natural world that he felt called to protect. The irony was not lost on him that a man born to ultimate privilege had found his greatest joy in the simple act of working with soil and plants. Critics had often dismissed his environmental advocacy as the luxury of someone who never had to worry about practical concerns. Yet here, in the heart of the Catholic Church, his passion for sustainable living was being honored and celebrated. Father Hudson stepped forward to explain the significance of the orange tree to the assembled group. This tree, he said, represents our commitment to caring for God's creation. It will remind future generations of seminarians that faith and environmental stewardship go hand in hand. The rector's words echoed themes that Charles had championed throughout his decades as heir apparent and now as king. The connection between spiritual responsibility and environmental care had been a constant thread in his public speeches and private conversations. Dr. Mitchell approached with a small packet of specially prepared soil amendments. "Your Majesty," she explained, "these nutrients will help the tree establish strong roots in its new environment." The composition mimics the mineral balance found in the finest Italian citrus groves. Charles accepted the packet, appreciating the scientific precision that supported this symbolic act. Throughout his life, he had insisted on combining traditional wisdom with modern knowledge, whether in farming techniques or architectural restoration. The seminarians moved closer as the moment for planting approached. Many had their phones ready to capture this historic moment, though they maintained the respectful distance appropriate to the solemnity of the occasion. Among them stood Michael Thompson, a young man from Liverpool whose journey to the priesthood had been influenced by environmental concerns. He had written his seminary thesis on the theological importance of creation care, drawing inspiration from both St. Francis of Assisi and modern ecological theology. "I never imagined I would witness something like this," Michael whispered to his classmate, Antonio Rossi from Milan. "The King of England planting a tree in our college garden. It feels like history in the making." Antonio nodded, his own excitement barely contained. As someone who grew up in northern Italy surrounded by citrus groves, he understood the cultural significance of the orange tree. "In my family," he replied quietly, "we say that planting a tree is an act of faith in the future. You may never taste its fruit, but you trust that others will." The simple wisdom of Antonio's words seemed to capture the essence of what was about to unfold. This ceremony was not about immediate gratification or political gain. Instead, it represented a quiet confidence in the continuation of traditions and the possibility of positive change. Sister Maria Benedetta approached King Charles with a blessed watering can, its silver surface reflecting the afternoon sunlight. "Your Majesty," she said, "would you like to bless this tree with water before we plant it?" Charles accepted the watering can, feeling its weight and warmth. The water inside had been blessed by Pope Francis himself during his morning prayers, adding another layer of significance to this already meaningful ceremony. As he prepared to water the tree, Charles reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From his earliest memories of accompanying his mother to official functions, through his decades as Prince of Wales, to his recent accession to the throne, he had always felt the weight of serving something greater than himself. The orange tree stood before him, its young leaves trembling slightly in the Vatican breeze, waiting to begin its new life in this sacred place. King Charles lifted the blessed silver watering can with reverent care, feeling the cool weight of the sacred water within. As he tilted it gently over the orange tree's root ball, each drop seemed to catch the Roman sunlight like tiny jewels falling to earth. The water darkened the soil around the young sapling, creating a small circle of moisture that would nurture new growth in the days to come. May this tree flourish as a symbol of our shared commitment to God's creation. Charles said softly, his words carrying across the quiet courtyard. The gathered seminarians bowed, their heads respectfully, understanding that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple gardening ceremony. Sister Maria Benedetta watched with knowing eyes as the king completed the watering ritual. In her 3 decades of tending Vatican gardens, she had seen many ceremonial plantings, but this one felt different. The sincerity in the king's movements, the careful attention he paid to ensuring every root received water, spoke of genuine understanding rather than mere protocol. Father Hudson stepped forward with a small ceremonial spade, its wooden handle polished smooth from years of use in the college gardens. "Your Majesty, if you would do us the honor of placing the tree in its new home," he said, gesturing toward the carefully prepared hole. Charles accepted the spade, running his fingers along its worn surface. This was not some ornate ceremonial tool created specifically for royal use, but rather an implement that had seen honest work in these gardens. The authenticity of the moment pleased him immensely. Dr. Sarah Mitchell moved closer to observe the king's technique as he began to work. She had advised countless gardeners over the years, from enthusiastic amateurs to professional landscapers, but rarely had she seen someone handle a young tree with such practiced confidence. Charles clearly understood the delicate balance between providing support and allowing natural growth. "The root system looks exceptionally healthy," Dr. Mitchell noted, examining the tree as the king carefully positioned it. "The nursery in Tuscany has done excellent work preparing this specimen for transplantation." The orange tree had indeed been chosen with extraordinary care. Brother Francesco, a Franciscan monk who specialized in citrus cultivation, had spent months selecting the perfect sapling from the monastery gardens near Florence. His expertise in both horticulture and spiritual matters made him uniquely qualified to choose a tree that would thrive in both the physical and symbolic environment of Vatican City. As Charles lowered the tree into its new home, Giuseppe Romano, the Vatican's head gardener, watched with professional interest. Romano's weathered hands had planted countless trees within these walls, but never before with a reigning monarch as the primary gardener. The experience felt surreal, yet somehow perfectly natural. "The drainage here is excellent, Your Majesty," Romano said in his heavily accented English. "My grandfather, he planted the lemon trees near the Sistine Chapel. They still give fruit after 60 years. The continuity of Romano's family service to the Vatican gardens added another layer of meaning to the ceremony. 3 generations of Romanos had dedicated their lives to maintaining these sacred spaces, understanding that their work contributed to the contemplative atmosphere that nurtured both prayer and learning. Seminary student Michael Thompson from Liverpool found himself thinking about his own grandfather, who had worked in the shipyards before their decline. The parallel between Romano's family tradition and his own family's industrial heritage struck him as profoundly moving. Both represented dedication to honest work in service of something greater than individual ambition. Antonio Rossi, the seminarian from Milan, watched the king's careful attention to the tree's positioning with growing admiration. His own family had cultivated citrus groves for generations, and he recognized the subtle expertise in Charles's handling of the sapling. This was clearly not the king's first experience with planting trees. Cardinal Bertello observed the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. As Vatican governor, he had overseen countless ceremonial events, but few had possessed this combination of simplicity and significance. The absence of elaborate protocol allowed the genuine meaning of the moment to emerge more clearly. The international camera crews captured every detail, though they maintained respectful distances that allowed the ceremony to proceed without intrusion. This footage would eventually reach audiences around the world, but the intimate nature of the gathering remained intact despite the media presence. Charles began to backfill the hole around the tree's roots, using the enriched soil that Dr. Mitchell had prepared. Each shovelful was placed with deliberate care, ensuring that no air pockets would compromise the tree's ability to establish itself in its new environment. "In my experience," the king said as he worked, "the first few weeks are crucial for any transplanted tree. It needs consistent care and attention as it adapts to new soil conditions. His words carried implications that extended far beyond horticulture. The seminarians understood that their own spiritual transplantation from secular life to religious vocation required similar patience and nurturing. Just as this orange tree would need time to develop deep roots in Vatican soil, their own faith would require years of careful cultivation. Sister Maria Benedetta approached with a small wooden marker that she had carved herself. The simple sign bore the date of the ceremony and a brief inscription in Latin, Arbor Pacis et Spe, Tree of Peace and Hope. The nun's craftsmanship reflected the same attention to detail that characterized all her work in the college gardens. Your Majesty, she said, presenting the marker, perhaps you would place this near the tree as a reminder of this day. Charles accepted the wooden sign, admiring the careful lettering that Sister Maria Benedetta had carved by hand. The simplicity of the marker appealed to his aesthetic sensibilities far more than an elaborate bronze plaque might have done. This humble wooden sign would weather and age naturally alongside the growing tree. As he positioned the marker at the base of the newly planted orange tree, Charles reflected on the countless gardens he had visited throughout his life. From the formal landscapes of royal palaces to the working farms of rural communities, he had always been drawn to places where human creativity combined with natural beauty to create something greater than either could achieve alone. The Vatican Gardens represented this synthesis at its finest. Here, centuries of careful cultivation had created spaces that inspired contemplation while providing practical benefits. The orange trees that already dotted the landscape bore fruit that appeared on Vatican tables, demonstrating that beauty and utility could coexist harmoniously. Father Hudson stepped forward with a final blessing, his voice carrying the weight of tradition and hope. May this tree grow strong and bear abundant fruit, reminding all who see it of our responsibility to care for the earth that God has entrusted to our stewardship. The rector's words echoed themes that had become central to modern Catholic teaching about environmental responsibility. Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si had emphasized the connection between care for the poor and care for the earth, themes that resonated deeply with King Charles's own environmental advocacy. Dr. Mitchell made notes on her tablet about the planting conditions and recommended care schedule. Her documentation would ensure that the tree received optimal care in the coming months, maximizing its chances of successful establishment. The scientific approach complemented the spiritual significance of the ceremony without diminishing it. Young seminarian Michael Thompson raised his hand tentatively. Your Majesty, may I ask what inspired your passion for gardening and environmental conservation? Charles smiled at the young man's earnest question. I suppose it began in childhood, he replied. My grandmother, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, had magnificent gardens at Royal Lodge. She taught me that gardening was not about imposing your will on nature, but about partnering with it to create something beautiful and sustainable. The king's candid response revealed the personal roots of his public advocacy. These early experiences in his grandmother's gardens had shaped his understanding of humanity's relationship with the natural world, influencing decades of environmental initiatives and sustainable farming practices. Antonio Rossi followed up with his own question. In Italy, we have an expression, Chi pianta un albero, pianta una speranza. Whoever plants a tree, plants hope. Do you see this ceremony as an expression of hope for the future? Absolutely, Charles replied without hesitation. Every tree we plant is an act of faith in tomorrow. We may not live to see it reach full maturity, but we trust that future generations will benefit from our efforts today. His response captured the essence of sustainable thinking, the willingness to work for benefits that might not be immediately visible or personally rewarding. This long-term perspective had characterized much of his environmental work throughout his decades of public service. Sister Maria Benedetta began to gather her gardening tools, but not before offering one final observation. Your Majesty, in my years tending these gardens, I have learned that the most beautiful trees are often those that face challenges. Wind makes them stronger, occasional drought teaches their roots to dig deeper. Her metaphorical wisdom resonated with everyone present, particularly the seminarians who understood that their own spiritual formation would involve both nurturing support and strengthening challenges. The orange tree would face Roman winters and summer heat, just as they would encounter difficulties in their future ministries. The ceremony was drawing to its close, but the impact of the morning's events would continue long after the last photographs were taken and the international visitors departed. The orange tree would remain, growing slowly but steadily, as a living reminder of this historic day when faith and environmental stewardship came together in the heart of the Catholic world. The afternoon shadows grew longer across the Vatican courtyard as the ceremonial planting concluded, but King Charles showed no signs of wanting to rush away from this peaceful setting. Instead, he lingered beside the newly planted orange tree, engaging in quiet conversation with the seminarians who had gathered around him with respectful curiosity. "Your Majesty," asked James O'Brien, a seminarian from Dublin whose weathered hand spoke of years working construction before answering his calling, "how do you balance the demands of royal duty with your personal passion for environmental work?" Charles considered the question carefully, his fingers absently brushing a leaf of the young orange tree. "I've been fortunate that my position has allowed me to advocate for causes I believe in deeply. But it was not always easy to convince others that environmental concerns were worth the attention of a monarchy." The honesty in his response surprised some of the young men. They had expected diplomatic answers, but instead found themselves engaged in a genuine conversation with someone who had faced real challenges in pursuing his convictions. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had been documenting the tree's placement and soil conditions, looked up from her notes to observe this impromptu educational moment. As a scientist who had worked with various organizations to promote sustainable practices, she appreciated the king's willingness to share his experiences with future religious leaders. Cardinal Bertello watched from a respectful distance, pleased by the natural evolution of the ceremony into something more meaningful than protocol had originally dictated. These unscripted moments often proved more valuable than carefully planned speeches, allowing authentic connections to develop between people who might otherwise never have the opportunity to interact so freely. Giuseppe Romano, the Vatican gardener, approached with a small notebook in which he recorded details about every tree planted within the Vatican walls. His meticulous records stretched back decades, creating a living history of the garden's development under various papal administrations. "Your Majesty," Romano said in his careful English, "I write here when we plant, what we plant, who helps with the planting. This tree, it will have a very special page in my book." The gardener's simple pride in his record-keeping touched Charles deeply. Here was a man who understood that seemingly small acts could accumulate into something significant over time. Romano's notebook represented the same long-term thinking that characterized successful environmental conservation efforts. Sister Maria Benedetta returned from storing her gardening tools, carrying a small clay pot filled with soil from around established orange trees elsewhere in the Vatican gardens. "Your Majesty," she explained, "I thought you might like to take some of this blessed earth back to England, perhaps for your own gardens at Highgrove." The gesture was both thoughtful and symbolically powerful. This soil, enriched by years of prayer and careful cultivation, would carry the essence of this day back to the king's beloved gardens in Gloucestershire. The connection between Vatican City and the English countryside would be maintained through this humble gift of earth. Charles accepted the small pot with evident pleasure. "This will have a place of honor in my garden," he assured Sister Maria Benedetta. "Every time I see it, I will remember this extraordinary day and the wonderful people who made it possible." Father Hudson joined the group, carrying a leather-bound journal that documented significant events in the college's history. "Your Majesty, would you be willing to write a brief entry about today's ceremony? Future generations of seminarians will treasure your words." The request appealed to Charles's sense of history and continuity. He had signed countless guest books and official documents throughout his life, but this felt different. This journal would remain in the college library, available to young men who would study here long after he was gone. Taking the offered pen, Charles considered his words carefully before writing. Today I planted an orange tree in the garden of Beda College. But, in truth, we all planted seeds of hope for a future where faith and environmental stewardship grow together. May this tree flourish as a reminder that care for God's creation is a sacred responsibility we all share. Michael Thompson, the seminarian from Liverpool, read the king's entry over his shoulder and felt a surge of inspiration. These were not empty diplomatic phrases, but words that reflected genuine conviction and hope. The young man made a mental note to return to this page often during his remaining years at the college. Antonio Rossi from Milan found himself thinking about his family's citrus groves back home. He wondered if his grandfather would believe him when he told the story of helping the King of England plant an orange tree in Vatican City. The surreal nature of the day still hadn't fully registered with any of the participants. Dr. Mitchell completed her documentation and approached the group with final recommendations. The tree should be watered every other day for the first 2 weeks, she explained to Giuseppe Romano. After that, weekly watering should suffice unless we experience an unusually dry period. Her practical advice grounded the ceremony's spiritual significance in horticultural reality. This orange tree would require ongoing care and attention, just like any living thing. The romance of the planting ceremony would be followed by months of mundane, but essential maintenance work. Charles nodded approvingly at Dr. Mitchell's instructions. In my experience, the care that follows the planting is far more important than the ceremony itself, he observed. A tree can survive a poor planting if it receives excellent ongoing care, but the most perfect planting will fail without proper follow-up attention. His comment reflected wisdom gained from decades of hands-on gardening experience. Unlike many public figures who participated in ceremonial plantings without understanding the practical realities involved, Charles clearly grasped the long-term commitment required for success. Cardinal Bertello approached with news that Pope Francis had expressed his regret at missing the ceremony due to other commitments, but had asked to be kept informed about the tree's progress. The papal interest in this small project elevated its significance within Vatican culture, ensuring that the orange tree would receive careful attention. His Holiness is particularly pleased by the environmental themes of today's ceremony, Cardinal Bertello explained. He has asked that photographs of the tree be sent to him periodically so he can follow its growth. The Pope's personal interest in the tree's development would guarantee its care while adding another layer of meaning to the project. This was no longer simply a tree planted by a visiting monarch, but a living symbol of papal commitment to environmental stewardship. Father Hudson suggested a brief tour of the college's existing gardens, hoping to show King Charles how the new orange tree would fit into the broader landscape. The rector's pride in the college grounds was evident as he pointed out various plantings and improvements that had been made over the years. The gardens surrounding Beda College reflected centuries of careful cultivation within the constraints of limited space. Every plant had been chosen not only for its beauty, but also for its ability to thrive in the unique microclimate created by Vatican City's walls and buildings. Charles examined the established citrus trees with professional interest, noting their health and productivity. These specimens are remarkably well-maintained, he commented to Giuseppe Romano. Your family's expertise is clearly evident in their condition. The compliment pleased the gardener immensely. Recognition from someone who clearly understood horticulture meant more to him than praise from officials who might appreciate the visual effect without understanding the skill required to achieve it. Sister Maria Benedetta pointed out the herb garden that supplied the college kitchen, as well as the small greenhouse where she started seedlings for the coming season. Her domain within the larger Vatican gardens was modest but efficiently organized, demonstrating how much could be accomplished within limited space. In religious life, she explained to Charles, we learn to make the most of what we have been given. These gardens teach our seminarians that good stewardship requires both vision and practical skills. Her words resonated with the king's own philosophy about resource management and sustainable practices. Whether applied to gardening, farming, or governance, the principles remain the same: careful observation, patient work, and respect for natural processes. The seminary students followed the tour with keen interest, seeing their familiar surroundings through new eyes as the king's questions and comments revealed details they had previously overlooked. The informal educational aspect of the tour pleased Charles as much as the formal ceremony had. These spontaneous conversations often proved more valuable than prepared speeches, allowing genuine exchange of ideas and experiences between people from vastly different backgrounds. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear that this simple tree planting ceremony had evolved into something far richer than anyone had originally planned. The combination of spiritual significance, environmental awareness, and human connection had created an experience that would remain meaningful long after the international media attention faded away. As evening approached and the Vatican bells chimed the hour, King Charles prepared to conclude his historic visit to Beda College. The orange tree stood proudly in its new home, its young leaves catching the last rays of golden sunlight that filtered through the ancient walls surrounding the courtyard. Giuseppe Romano made one final check of the tree's position and watering, his professional pride evident in every careful adjustment he made to the soil around the base. The veteran gardener understood that the next few weeks would be critical for the sapling's survival, and he was determined that this particular tree would thrive under his care. "Your Majesty," Romano said, straightening up from his work, "I promise you, this tree will have the best care. My grandson, he is learning the gardens now. Maybe one day, he will show his grandson this tree that the King of England planted." The continuity implied in Romano's words touched everyone present. 4 generations of the Romano family would potentially be involved in caring for this single tree, creating a living link between past, present, and future that embodied the deepest values of both monarchy and religious tradition. Charles smiled warmly at the elderly gardener's commitment. "I have complete confidence in your care, Mr. Romano. This tree could not be in better hands." Sister Maria Benedetta approached with a small seedling in a terracotta pot, its leaves glistening with carefully applied water. "Your Majesty," she said, "this is a cutting from one of our oldest lemon trees, grown from seed that came from the Holy Land many years ago. Perhaps you would accept it as a remembrance of today." The gift was both unexpected and deeply meaningful. This small plant carried genetic heritage that connected it to the biblical lands where citrus fruits had first been cultivated thousands of years ago. The living link to sacred geography would find new life in the gardens of Gloucestershire. Charles accepted the potted cutting with reverence appropriate to its spiritual significance. "This will have a special place at Highgrove," he assured the nun. "I will think of today every time I tend to its care." Father Hudson stepped forward with final words that seemed to capture the essence of the entire ceremony. "Your Majesty, what began as a simple tree planting has become a profound reminder that we are all gardeners in God's creation. The seeds we plant today, whether in soil or in hearts, will continue growing long after we are gone." The rector's metaphorical language resonated with the assembled group, particularly the seminarians who understood that their own spiritual formation represented another form of planting and cultivation. The skills they learned within these walls would eventually bear fruit in parishes around the world. Michael Thompson from Liverpool found himself profoundly moved by the day's events. As someone who had left a successful construction career to pursue priesthood, he understood the courage required to plant seeds whose harvest might not be immediately visible. The orange tree would remind him daily of the faith required to work for long-term rather than short-term results. Antonio Rossi from Milan felt a deep connection to his Italian heritage as he watched the king carefully position the lemon cutting among his belongings. This plant would travel from Vatican soil to English gardens, carrying with it the prayers and hopes of everyone who had participated in its blessing. Dr. Sarah Mitchell completed her final documentation, ensuring that future researchers would have detailed records of the tree's planting conditions and care requirements. Her scientific approach complemented the ceremony's spiritual dimensions without diminishing their significance. The combination of blessed soil, optimal planting techniques, and committed ongoing care gives this tree an excellent prognosis, she observed to Cardinal Bertello. Both symbolically and horticulturally, we have created conditions for long-term success. The cardinal nodded approvingly, understanding that the tree's practical survival was just as important as its ceremonial significance. A failed planting would have sent entirely the wrong message about stewardship and care for creation. As the formal conclusion approached, Charles took one last moment to examine the newly planted orange tree. Its small size belied the enormous symbolic weight it would carry as a reminder of this extraordinary day. Future generations of seminarians would study in its eventual shade, perhaps finding inspiration in its steady growth and seasonal changes. The international camera crews began packing their equipment, having captured extensive footage of both the ceremony and the impromptu educational discussions that followed. This documentation would preserve the event for historical analysis, while sharing its messages about environmental stewardship with global audiences. James O'Brien from Dublin approached King Charles with a final question that had been weighing on his mind. Your Majesty, when you return to England and resume your royal duties, what will you remember most about today? Charles considered the question thoughtfully before responding. I will remember the genuine commitment of everyone here to caring for something larger than themselves. Whether tending gardens or preparing for ministry, you are all engaged in work that serves future generations. His answer reflected the deeper themes that had emerged throughout the day. This ceremony had been about far more than planting a single tree. It had demonstrated the connections between faith, environmental responsibility, and service to others that characterized the best impulses of human nature. Cardinal Bertello offered closing remarks that would formally conclude the ceremony. Today we have witnessed something remarkable, he said, his voice carrying across the quiet courtyard. His Majesty has honored us with his presence, but, more importantly, he has participated in an act of creation that reflects our highest calling as stewards of God's gifts. The cardinal's words seemed to summarize the profound simplicity of what had occurred. A king had planted a tree, but in doing so, he had demonstrated values that transcended royal protocol or religious ritual. The ceremony had become a meditation on responsibility, hope, and the patient work required to create positive change. Sister Maria Benedetta began gathering the tools and supplies that had been used throughout the day, her movements economical and purposeful after decades of similar cleanup tasks. Even these mundane activities carried dignity when performed in service of something meaningful. Giuseppe Romano lingered near the orange tree, making mental notes about adjustments he might need to make based on how the sapling responded to its new environment over the coming days. His grandfather had taught him that the days immediately following transplantation were crucial, requiring constant attention and subtle interventions. Tomorrow I will check the soil moisture, he told Dr. Mitchell. If the roots seem stressed, I have special preparations that my family has used for many generations. The combination of traditional knowledge and modern horticultural science represented the same synthesis that had characterized the entire ceremony. Ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding could work together to achieve results that neither could accomplish alone. Father Hudson approached King Charles with final expressions of gratitude that seemed inadequate to the significance of what had been shared. Your Majesty, your presence here today has elevated not just this ceremony, but our entire understanding of how faith and environmental care must work together. Charles responded with characteristic humility. I have been honored to participate in something that felt genuinely meaningful. This tree will stand as a reminder that small acts, performed with love and commitment, can have lasting impact. As the king prepared to depart, each person present understood that they had witnessed something special. The orange tree would continue growing in Vatican soil, but the ideas and inspirations planted alongside it would travel much further, influencing future environmental initiatives and spiritual practices around the world. The simple wooden marker that Sister Maria Benedetta had crafted would weather and age alongside the growing tree, its Latin inscription serving as a permanent reminder of the day when King Charles III planted seeds of hope in the heart of the Catholic Church. Future visitors would pause to read those words, Arbor Pacis et Spei, and perhaps be inspired to plant their own trees of peace and hope wherever their callings might lead them. The ceremony concluded as shadows lengthened across the Vatican walls, but its impact would continue growing for decades to come, nurtured by the same patient care that would tend the orange tree through seasons of growth and challenge ahead.